I never thought I'd be the guy who falls in love during a sound check, but here we are. My name is Adrian, I'm 26, and I play bass in what might generously be called an indie rock band. More accurately, we're four guys who work day jobs and dream about making it while playing dive bars to audiences that could comfortably fit in a sedan. The night everything changed started like every other gig we'd played that spring, with me loading equipment into my beat-up Honda and wondering why we kept doing this to ourselves. It was a Tuesday in March, and we had a show booked at this venue called The Basement in a college town about an hour from where I lived. Not the most creative name, but accurate. It was literally a basement under a pizza place. The promoter had promised us a decent slot and said Tuesday nights usually drew a crowd. I should have known better. I've been playing in bands since I was 19, and promoters always say that. They also always lie. We got there around 6 to set up, and the place was completely dead. Not like sparse, like actually empty except for the bartender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The opening band hadn't even shown up yet. My bandmates, Tyler on guitar, Mason on drums, and Quinn on vocals, they all had this look on their faces that I knew too well. It was the look that comes right before someone suggests we pack it up and go home. We'd driven an hour, we'd taken time off work, and we were about to play to literally nobody. I was standing there coiling a cable, trying to decide if I should be the one to say we should bail, when the door at the top of the stairs opened and someone came down. I looked up, and that's when I saw him for the first time. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that looked effortlessly perfect. He wore a gray Henley and dark jeans, and he moved with this easy confidence as he descended the stairs, taking in the empty room like it was exactly what he expected. He walked straight to the bar, ordered a beer, then turned and leaned against it, looking directly at the stage, looking directly at me. And he smiled. Not a polite smile, but a real one that reached his eyes and made something in my chest tighten. Tyler nudged me. "Dude, you gonna finish that cable or just stand there?" I blinked and looked down, realizing I'd stopped moving entirely. "Yeah, sorry." I finished coiling the cable and tried not to look back at the guy at the bar, but I could feel his eyes on me. It made my skin warm in a way that had nothing to do with the stuffy basement air. We did our sound check, and he watched the whole thing. Not on his phone, not distracted, just watching and occasionally nodding along when Quinn tested the mic with bits of melody. When we finished, he raised his beer slightly in our direction, and I found myself raising my hand back before I could think about it. "Well," Quinn said, hopping down from the stage, "at least we have one fan." "One very cute fan," Mason added, and I shot him a look that made him grin. Mason had known I was gay since before I'd fully accepted it myself. He had this annoying ability to read me like a book. We had about 45 minutes before we were supposed to go on, and the opening band still hadn't shown. The promoter, a stressed-looking guy in his early 20s, kept making phone calls and getting increasingly agitated. Finally, he came over and told us the opener had canceled. Their van broke down an hour outside of town. He asked if we'd be willing to go on early and play a longer set. I looked around the room, still empty, except for the bartender and the guy with the dark hair. To an audience of one? The promoter shrugged helplessly. "I've already paid you guys. And honestly, yeah, it sucks, but Jude drove from out of town specifically for this show. Seems like it'd be cool to at least give him something." "Wait," I said. "You know him." "He called earlier, asking what time doors were. Said he was coming from kind of far. Seemed really excited about it." The promoter looked embarrassed. I may have oversold how big our Tuesday crowds are. I glanced back at the bar. Jude. His name was Jude. He was looking at his phone now, and I could see the blue light reflecting on his face. Something about knowing his name made him feel more real, more present. "How far did he drive?" The promoter checked his phone. "He said 4 hours, I think. Maybe it was 3. I don't know, man. I was doing like 5 things when he called. 4 hours. This guy had driven 4 hours to see a band he'd probably only heard on Spotify or Bandcamp, to a show in a basement on a Tuesday night, and he'd ended up being the only person here. That was either incredibly dedicated or slightly unhinged, and I wasn't sure which possibility I found more intriguing. Quinn made the decision for us. Let's play. We're here, he's here, and honestly, I'd rather play for one person who actually wants to hear us than a packed room of people talking over us. So we set up, and I tried not to think about how intimate this was about to be. Usually there's a buffer between you and the audience, even in small venues. Bodies and noise and the general chaos of a crowd. But this was going to be just us and Jude, and every mistake would be crystal clear, every moment exposed. We started with one of our faster songs, trying to bring energy to the dead room. I kept my eyes on my fretboard for the first verse, focusing on hitting the notes clean, but then I looked up, and Jude had moved closer to the stage. He was standing maybe 10 feet away, and he was completely locked in. Not just listening, but present in a way that made my fingers stumble slightly on the next measure. He noticed. I saw his eyebrow quirk up slightly, and then he smiled again, and I felt my face get hot. I forced myself to focus, to fall into the rhythm and let muscle memory take over. We moved through the song, and by the end, Jude was nodding his head, his beer forgotten on a nearby table. Between songs, Quinn said into the mic, "Thanks for being here, man. This is definitely the most intimate show we've ever played." Jude laughed, and his voice carried easily in the empty space. Best seat in the house. We played for an hour and 15 minutes, running through basically our entire set list, plus a couple of covers we'd been working on. And the weirdest thing happened. It stopped feeling awkward. It started feeling like we were playing a private show for someone who actually cared about the music. Jude knew the words to some of our songs. He sang along quietly, and when I could hear his voice blending with Quinn's on the chorus of our most popular track, something shifted in my chest. I started watching him between songs, during the brief moments when I could look up without losing my place. He had this way of moving to the music that was understated but genuine, not trying to impress anyone, just feeling it. And a few times, I caught him watching me specifically, not just the band as a whole, and those moments made my heart rate pick up in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of playing. After our last song, Jude clapped enthusiastically, and we packed up our gear in a strange, buzzing silence. My bandmates were giving me looks that I was deliberately ignoring. The promoter paid us in cash and apologized again about the turnout, and then Tyler, Mason, and Quinn made excuses about needing to get back home. They were not subtle about it. "You should stay for a bit," Mason said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Have a beer. You drove separately anyway." I watched them haul their equipment up the stairs, and then it was just me and Jude and the bartender, who was very obviously cleaning up to close early. Jude was sitting at the bar again, and he looked over at me. "Can I buy you a drink?" I walked over, my bass case bumping against my leg. "You drove 4 hours to get here." "I did. For us. For our band." He smiled. "Yeah." I sat down next to him, leaving one stool between us, a buffer of space that felt both too much and necessary. "Why?" The bartender brought me a beer without me ordering, and Jude took a sip of his own before answering. "I found your music about 6 months ago. One of those algorithm things, where Spotify just randomly plays something and it hits you right. It was that song you closed with tonight, actually. The one about driving at night and feeling like you're the only person awake in the world." "Interstate Insomnia," I said. "That's the one. And I connected with it, So I listened to everything else you guys had put out, and I followed you on social media, and when I saw you were playing tonight, I just thought, why not? I had the day off tomorrow. It's a Tuesday. What else was I going to do? Sleep, probably, like a normal person." He laughed, and it was warm and real. "I'm Jude, by the way. Adrian. I know, I've watched your videos. He looked slightly embarrassed. That sounds creepy. I mean, the band videos. On YouTube. It's not creepy, I said, and I meant it. There was something disarming about his honesty, the way he didn't try to play it cool. It's actually kind of amazing. We've never had anyone do something like that before. We talked for the next hour, while the bartender cleaned around us with increasing passive aggression. Jude told me he worked in graphic design, that he lived in a city about 4 hours north, that he'd been following the local music scene there, but nothing had grabbed him the way our stuff did. I told him about how the band started, about my day job at a bookstore, about how we kept playing shows like tonight because we were either dedicated or delusional, and we hadn't figured out which yet. Dedicated, Jude said firmly. Definitely dedicated. Even though literally no one else showed up. I showed up. You don't count as people. That's pretty existential. He grinned. I mean, I'm one person. Singular. Not people, plural. Fair point. I was smiling so hard my face hurt. When was the last time that happened? When was the last time I'd sat with someone and felt this easy, this comfortable, this seen? The bartender finally came over and told us he was closing up, and we took the hint. Outside, the spring air was cool and damp, and the street was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. Jude's car was parked a few spots down from mine, and we walked slowly toward them. So, I said, 4 hours back. Yeah, that's a long drive this late. He shrugged. I've done worse. And honestly, totally worth it. I stopped walking and turned to face him. The streetlight caught his features, casting half his face in shadow, and I felt something in my chest that was too big and too fast and too real. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you really drive all this way just for the music? He was quiet for a moment, and in that pause, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of us, standing on a quiet street in a town neither of us lived in. At first, yeah, he said finally. But then I got here, and I saw you doing sound check, and I thought, okay, maybe it's not just the music. My heart was hammering. Yeah? Yeah. He took a small step closer. Is that okay? I'd known I was gay since college. I'd dated a few guys, had a couple of short relationships that fizzled out. But I'd never felt this before, this magnetic pull, this sense that someone saw past all my defenses to something true underneath. It's more than okay. We stood there, and I could feel the moment stretching out, full of possibility. And then Jude said, I should probably get on the road. You should probably get some sleep first. There's a diner down the street that's open 24 hours. We could get coffee. I thought you said sleep, not coffee. I'm bad at suggestions. He laughed. Coffee sounds perfect. We ended up at that diner until almost 4 in the morning, sitting in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, drinking terrible coffee and eating mediocre pie. We talked about everything. Music and art and the weird pressure of your 20s when you're supposed to have everything figured out, but you absolutely don't. Jude told me about coming out to his parents in college, about the relief and terror of it. I told him about my own coming out, about how my mom had cried and then immediately started asking if I was dating anyone, like her concern had just shifted categories. Are you? He asked. Dating anyone? No. You? No. The word hung between us, full of weight and promise. His foot brushed against mine under the table, and neither of us moved away. It felt like we were building something in that booth, something fragile and important. When we finally left the diner, the sky was starting to lighten at the edges. Jude looked exhausted, and I felt wired and alive. You can't drive now, I said. You'll fall asleep at the wheel. I'll be fine. Jude, you've been up for like 24 hours. Just, I don't know, get a hotel room or something. In this town? At 4 in the morning? I took a breath. There's a couch at my apartment. It's an hour from here, but it's closer than 4 hours. He looked at me, and I could see him weighing it, considering the implications. Are you sure? I'm sure. So he followed me back to my place, and I spent the entire drive hyper-aware of his headlights in my rearview mirror, terrified he'd change his mind and turn around. But he didn't. He followed me all the way to my apartment complex, parked next to me, and walked up the stairs with his overnight bag slung over his shoulder. My apartment was small and cluttered with music equipment and books. I suddenly saw it through his eyes and felt embarrassed by the dishes in the sink and the laundry I'd meant to fold 3 days ago. But Jude just looked around and said, "This is great. Very you. You don't know me well enough to know what's very me. I know your music. That's a start." I showed him the couch, got him a blanket and a pillow, and we stood there in my dim living room as the sun started to really come up outside. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight, for the show, for the coffee, for this. Thank you for driving 4 hours to an empty room. Best show I've ever been to." I wanted to kiss him. The wanting was so strong it felt like a physical force, pulling me toward him. But it also felt too soon, too fast, even though we'd been talking for hours and it felt like I'd known him longer. So instead I said, "Good night, Jude. Good night, Adrian." I went to my bedroom and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing he was just on the other side of the wall. I could hear him moving around, getting settled, and then silence. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, replaying every moment of the night, every smile and laugh and brush of contact. Around noon, I finally gave up on sleep and went out to the living room. Jude was awake, sitting on the couch with his phone, and he looked up when I came in. "Morning. Morning. Did you sleep?" "A few hours. You?" "Not really." He smiled. "Yeah, me neither. Not much anyway." I made coffee. Real coffee this time, and we sat at my small kitchen table. The morning light was harsh and revealing, and I thought maybe things would feel different now, awkward or forced, but they didn't. If anything, it felt more natural, like we'd crossed some threshold in the night and come out the other side into something real. "I should probably head back," Jude said eventually. But he didn't move. "Probably. It's a long drive." "It is." Neither of us moved. And then Jude said, "Or I could stay a little longer, if that's okay." "It's very okay." We spent the day together. I showed him around my neighborhood, took him to the bookstore where I worked, introduced him to my co-worker, who raised her eyebrows at me in a way that said she knew exactly what was happening. We got lunch at this Thai place I loved, and Jude told me more about his life, his friends, his apartment that he shared with a roommate who was never home. And slowly, throughout the day, we got closer. Our hands brushed when we walked. He put his hand on my back when we navigated through a crowded sidewalk. I touched his arm when I was making a point about something. Small things, but each one felt significant, like we were learning the language of each other. By evening, we were back at my apartment, and the reality that he needed to leave was becoming unavoidable. We were sitting on the couch, closer than we'd been before, and I could feel the weight of goodbye approaching. "I don't want to go," Jude said quietly. "I don't want you to go. This is crazy, right? We just met. We've been talking for like 18 hours straight. That's not very long in the grand scheme of things." I turned to face him fully. "It's long enough to know that I want to see you again, that I want to know what this is." He reached out and took my hand, threading our fingers together. "I live 4 hours away." "I know. That's not exactly practical." "I know. But I want to see you again too. I want to know what this is." And then, finally, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. I kissed him back, and it deepened, became something sure and certain. His hand came up to cup my face, and I felt like every nerve ending in my body was awake and singing. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. "Okay," Jude said. "Okay, so that's what this is." "Yeah. I'm still 4 hours away." "I know. We'll figure it out." And we did. Jude drove home that night and we texted the entire time so I'd know he was safe. We talked on the phone the next day and the day after that. We made plans for him to come back the following weekend, and I drove up to see him the weekend after that. It wasn't easy, the distance, but it felt worth it. He felt worth it. 3 months later, my band played another show, this time in Jude's city. We promoted it heavily, and the venue was actually packed. But before we went on, I found Jude in the crowd, and he was smiling at me the same way he had that first night in the empty basement. Like I was the only person in the room. Like driving any distance, enduring any inconvenience, was worth it for this. After the show, he came backstage, and I kissed him in front of my bandmates and a bunch of strangers, not caring who saw. "Best show ever?" I asked. "Second best," he said. "The first one is still my favorite." The empty room? The empty room. Just you and me and the music. 6 months after that, Jude moved. He found a job in my city, found an apartment, and suddenly the distance that had defined us was gone. We could see each other whenever we wanted, fall asleep together and wake up together, build a life that didn't require constant coordination and long drives. But sometimes, when we're lying in bed and he's half asleep against my shoulder, I think about that night, the empty basement, the 4-hour drive, the moment I looked up and saw him watching me like I was something worth crossing state lines for. And I think about how love sometimes announces itself quietly, in a room where nobody else is paying attention, in a gesture that seems absurd until it becomes the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for you. Jude drove 4 hours to see my band play to an empty room, and he said it was worth it. And you know what? He was right. It was worth every mile.